Let me first of all introduce our panel. We are joined here today by Leanne Kemp, CEO of Everledger and heading up the office of the Queensland Chief Entrepreneur, and Kate Cornick, the CEO of Launchvic. And I'm really delighted that you could make it today. We want to discuss the implications of the current COVID crisis, but also now take a look forward into what is going to happen in the world of tech, in the world of startups, as our economies likely, very likely, are heading to a mid to longer term recession. As always in entrepreneurship, we believe there are issues, there will be severe consequences. Our COVID research and the global startup ecosystem report we just launched demonstrate the impact that the crisis and what is to be expected had on funding, had on employment in the startup ecosystems. But as always, there are also opportunities. And given the importance of startup ecosystems for employment, for societal change, positive change, as government leaders, as ecosystem leaders, we want to learn from you and what you've done in Australia and in New Zealand in order to help our startup ecosystems to get through the current peak of the crisis, but also take a longer term vision in terms of what are you planning to do, what is happening in order to sustain, to keep our ecosystems intact and as prosperous as they have been pre-crisis. So if you don't mind, maybe let us start right away with one or two examples from each of you in regards to good policies, good actions you've taken to help your startups to navigate through the crisis. I'm glad, Vic, you've joined us as well. Vic Crone, who heads up innovation and entrepreneurship for New Zealand. And maybe, Vic, you could take it away right away. We were so impressed when we talked to your colleagues in New Zealand about the immediate and spontaneous reaction and support activities you had for your ecosystem. Really in the middle of the storm, so to speak. I believe we had a long discussion about 6 weeks ago, and that was truly impressive.
Yes, so kia ora everyone, and thank you so much for having me here. I think what was really important is that we understood where our entrepreneurs were at very quickly. So immediately we went out to see what their biggest issues were that they were struggling with and their challenges. And what we found was that, like the previous speaker, actually, about 2/3 of our entrepreneurs, they're incredibly resilient. They're ready to pivot or accelerate their products because COVID had created this opportunity for them. So with that knowledge, it was therefore about the challenge they had, as you know, many of you have, is cash. We had to get cash into their hands fast. And so there's a number of ways you get cash into businesses' hands. We did that through the likes of the wage subsidy, which was exceptionally successful to keep jobs going. We extended the wage subsidy to pre-revenue companies, so to ensure that those who had not just lost revenue but had lost capital were able to access that. We put loans into the hands of our businesses. We've actually just stood up a substantial size loan around specifically protecting R&D activity, so research and development activity and jobs in the R&D space. So we know, as many of you know, as countries, if we can maintain that R&D activity, that our chances of economic recovery are faster and quicker. And so those are the sorts of things that we did. We've been working with the ecosystem really closely. It's easy to do that in New Zealand. We're an island or two islands of 5 million people. So those were the sorts of things that we did. We have launched a government capital investment fund of an additional 300 million last year. So as investment in regards to it has all around the world, then the government has some capital to step into that space as well. So those were the sorts of things that we were able to mobilize around pretty quickly.
Vic, thank you very much for sharing that. And again, I quoted a number of really great examples before: capital injection from the public sphere, from governments during the crisis, but also now looking at what's going to happen in the next 12 months. And I think we all ought to help investors to sustain their seed and later stage investment. So that's great to hear. Kate, in Melbourne, you've almost or more than doubled the value of your ecosystem over the last 12 months, which is an incredible success. So congratulations to this fantastic development that we can show in the GSER. When you look at what's coming up in the future for your ecosystem, what are you looking at doing in terms of helping sustain the momentum for your ecosystem, public demand generation, funding, whatever it might be?
Yeah, I think there are two things that we learned from Startup Genome's research of Melbourne, and we really have loved working with the JF and the team in helping us understand what the challenges are. I think the first very much goes to what Vic says is cash, and we actually knew in Melbourne we have a number of indicators that through the Startup Genome research where we monitor the ecosystem, and in fact access to capital is one of our weakest points. So while we're very strong in some areas, access to capital was a problem before COVID. It's even more of a problem now. In terms of what we're doing there, we certainly have federal government programs, and there's been wage subsidies, a program called JobKeeper that has been released by the federal government. In the state government in Victoria, we've waived payroll tax for companies that pay payroll for the current financial year. But we've also, in the last few weeks, done some work specifically on the ecosystem, which was in train before COVID, but has become even more important post-COVID. The first was we worked with Josh Lerner at Bella Capital, who I know was a partner on the report, to really think about our angel network ecosystem. And we had a pretty uncompetitive angel network ecosystem here, 2 or 3 angel networks. And for a city of our size and an ecosystem of our size, we should be looking at something like 15 to 20 angel networks. And that's not angel investors here, it's just they're not syndicating, and there's not the sort of culture of angel networks. So we've actually established and announced 4 new angel networks that are going to see a minimum of $10 million flow into the sector quite quickly through angel funding, particularly at that seed and Series A. And we've also, just a week ago, the Victorian government launched a $250 million Victorian Business Growth Fund, which is for companies that are a little bit more mature, your Series A, Series B companies that have got revenue on a growth trajectory and are looking for either an equity or a debt injection. So that's really important. The other one, of course, that we're looking at is our ecosystem density. We have about 300 odd million startups per million population, and we know the top ecosystems have over 1,000 startups per population. So there's a lot more we need to do to increase density, and I think that also goes to recovery and what we do post COVID and learn from London and New York that really grew out of the GFC. So I think there's some there's some opportunity there, and I'll happily talk about that in a moment.
Kate, thanks very much for mentioning particularly the role of angels. The role of angels, of well-functioning angel syndicates, is undoubtedly extremely critical. We see that everywhere. Do you mind expounding just a little bit how you support angel groups? Is this more training, the delivery of the formation of angel groups? Are there is there any funding support, as most likely angels will struggle to make a financial return in 2020, 2021?
Yeah, so
what's the thinking in that?
There's two lots of thinking. The first is about training, and we know angels need training, and many angels come from very prestigious careers. They're highly experienced. Angel investing is a science and an art, and it's not something that is necessarily translates from traditional investing or indeed other forms of management and business life. So there's definitely a training element, and one of the things that we've done in Melbourne is set up a university accredited VC course. It's a short course. It's based on Stanford's program, and we've set up a very similar program in collaboration with some great people, both at the University of Melbourne in Australia and also Stanford in the US. And through that course, we're training people who have got money. So that's family offices, high net worth, sophisticated investors. And we're giving them the tools of the trade and the experience, and also the networks to tap into. So that's education. And we have some other programs where we're doing online education, etc. In terms of how we're supporting new angel networks, we actually, on advice from Professor Lerner, we decided that we should be supporting the operations to establish angel networks. And this was really tapping into the fact that we did have active angels in our community, but they weren't necessarily very well known to founders that didn't know them, and they weren't necessarily building networks beyond their immediate friends that they already invested with. So we actually ran a grants program to say, well, if you're an investor that is experienced and would be interested in starting an angel network, then please apply, and we'll fund that angel network for 2 years. So we're not funding the investment, we're funding the operations. And it's actually quite a low cost way to untap capital. So in Australia, we're investing $250,000, $250,000 over 2 to 3 years to set those angel networks up. And in return, they're unlocking, in the order of $2.5 to $5 million each. So it's been a really useful policy lever for us, and as a result we're really starting to see angels come out of the woodwork, and it's been quite interesting that we've launched this during COVID. Networks are very worried about how they would go about attracting new investors, but in fact all of them have actually been really positive about the interest that there's been from people that are interested in angel investing. And it just shows that catalyst of having an angel network will spur on the community, whereas when that catalyst isn't there, it all sort of happens in a bit of a dark art behind closed doors. No one knows who the angel investors are. The startups who aren't friends with angels don't know where they are, and so catalyzing can sometimes be a really low cost but high return activity, and that's something that we're certainly learning here.
I'm so glad to hear what undoubtedly is an upbeat message. When you see a lot of media reportage, it is about what's happening to the larger VC funds, the larger mechanisms of finance. We don't shine, from my perspective, the spotlight enough on pre-seed, seed, and the important role, the undoubtedly most important role that angels and well-functioning angel groups have in every ecosystem we've seen in all our work. The role of these angels is incredibly important in order to provide the mentorship, the smart money at very early stages. And I was fearful, to be honest, that would dry up as high net worth individuals, family offices close doors and try to better understand what's happening in the economy. So that's great for sharing this super.
And I would say message. We only announced the angel networks 4 weeks ago. They were established 4 weeks ago. One of them has already made their first investment, and it's a Australasia initiative here. Our first investment was a New Zealand company. So what we're doing in Victoria will hopefully benefit our neighbours in Australasia as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kate. Yeah, and we had the opportunity to briefly speak yesterday, and you mentioned a number of really positive messages as well, particularly in regard to how the startup ecosystem, our innovation capability in the ecosystem, can help us almost define new economic structures, not post-COVID going back to the way we've done business, extended global supply chains with high risks, with negative externalities, but use the thinking that's in tech and the creative and tech sector in order to really rejig our economy and possibly make it a better one, a more inclusive one, a more resilient one. If you could share a few examples of your thinking, that would be really great.
No problems. Queensland as a state has an outstanding track record. We're building on 20 years and about $4.9 billion in investment in the ecosystem for startups, scale-ups and entrepreneurs. And in the last 5 years alone, there's about $755 million investment that has been poured in by Queensland government, matched out by program partners. And these program partners provided incredible platform strength in the reaction, of course, to COVID. And I echo some of the support mechanisms that, of course, we're already running in terms of financial support with the likes of New Zealand and also Victoria. But Queensland, before I get onto those economic turn points, I just wanted to touch on a couple of other things that were really at the forefront of our response that leading now into recovery. And that is, government has a large purse around procurement. So how do we front end procurement into the engagement with our startups and scale-ups? And that certainly has helped. Not only that, government is also able to very easily articulate the demand curves that are required. So if you can actually match those demands, PPE being a prime example, ventilator machines, sanitizers, and we had a pivot program that also enabled parts of government to work in this really interesting way in a public-private partnership to help fund those critical turn points, not only in the skills transition, but also with capital for actual machinery. Now, of course, when we think about Queensland, we actually export more goods and services than New South Wales and Victoria combined. And we actually have huge international bench strength. We know and understand that through the COVID crisis, there was a huge transition across into the digital economy, and parts of that we needed to bring very quickly micro-credentialing into the forefront of not only training our founders, but also entire teams across all of Queensland. And now coupled with that, there is also now this localization of supply chains. When we think about localized manufacturing or reshoring jobs, I do speak about how do we transform entire economies in our rural and regional Queensland centres, and that is through the circular economy. How can we think about the marrying of new material science, our ability to fast-track manufacturing, and ensure that our 77 local government regions that sit here in Queensland are all able to hang their hat on an economic transition strategy, but not actually falling asleep to the importance of international investment. And I think that's actually a big key signalling here. We can do a fair bit to support early stage entrepreneurs, of course, but we do have a significant number of zebras, not unicorns. They're the mythical creatures, but zebras, the rare but real startups that are scaling. And these, of course, need international investment and continued international investment. And rightfully so, our government, of course, is nervous about that foreign investment. But, of course, we've worked very heavily on ensuring that that foreign capital is still flowing here into Australia. And of course, we're looking forward to, hopefully one day we'll have a travel bubble with New Zealand, but it's so great to see Victoria already identifying the incredible brains trust of the talent that's in New Zealand.
Yeah, thanks so much. Vic, maybe I can take it up right here. You mentioned, and you've been advocating for the opportunity of scaling companies out of New Zealand to really create the economic value, the employment value that you're looking for. Then, just out of interest, how do you keep this global connectivity, the connectivity to global markets, demand to investors alive in a time where we can't travel?
Yeah, I mean,
for us, this has been a shock to the system. Yeah, all our work was based on sitting on an aeroplane and seeing government leaders and policy leaders, and that had to shift very quickly. So I wonder how you are transitioning.
Well, first can I say thank you to my colleagues in Australia, and I think that this has actually brought us closer in regards to the opportunities. And the one thing that we do share is we're a little bit further away from the rest of the world than many, and it takes us a little bit longer to get there. So that means that we're incredibly resilient and determined. So the fact that I can't travel and spend, 24 hours on a plane to come talk to you, we are finding that investors are very comfortable to get on calls like this. And so this is a very effective mechanism for us. I don't know what my Australian colleagues are finding, but yes, it's a pain. What I hear from most of our entrepreneurs here is that they miss their cities around the world that they go hang out in, but actually it's not impeding them doing business, seeking international investments. There's definitely issues in supply chains, and that was referenced a little bit earlier in terms of, how we keep those going across, with all of the challenges, et cetera, et cetera. But in regards to conversations around investment, connecting internationally, we work really hard to do that with Australia. We have the Trans-Tasman group that we're connected on all sorts of fronts across all sorts of sectors, and that's been firing up through COVID-19. But using Zoom has actually it's kind of neutralized the fact that we both have to travel so far to come see you all around the world. And now there's probably a few people who want to come visit us because of the way that we have, really effectively managed COVID. We're not through it yet, but we're doing damn well. And so as borders start to open up, our countries are both pretty safe. And so that's a great place to attract talent. We're certainly out there as Australia are, attracting industries here, in the tech sector and the creative sector to do their work in, quite safe environments and beautiful environments.
Can I add to that as well, Vic? I mean, I started my day this morning. It's 9 p.m. in Australia. I started my day at 8 a.m. on a call to Loretta McCarthy, the managing director of Golden Seeds in the US, talking about angel investors and how that ends. And then I'm finishing the day at this global conference. Both of those things would not have happened in a COVID environment. I would have been on a plane to New York and I would have been on a plane to Europe for this conference. And that would have taken 2 weeks out of my life probably. So, every single day is radically different now. And Loretta I'm sure she won't mind me talking, but I'm paraphrasing her from this morning, but she made the comment that a few months ago, the idea that she would invest in a company without having met them in person was an anomaly, whereas now this is the norm, and our investors and our angel investors are making investments day in, day out, and vetting startups over Zoom. And I think that then opens Australia and New Zealand up, who have got incredibly talented entrepreneurs, actually quite competitive valuations for investors is something that we hear routinely compared to our European and North American counterparts. So we're definitely getting a lot of interest in people who want to know what we're doing. And of course, the other thing is the time zone into the Asia Pacific, which makes medtech and those sorts of opportunities really, really interesting. So yeah, there's a real interest that's come out of this that we're seeing, which is really exciting for us, and probably 2 weeks of my life every year if this continues.
And again, it is, Kate, thanks for sharing such an upbeat message. Yeah, when all of this started, we were really concerned about the global connectedness, which we believe ecosystems in our research, their startup is 2.5 times faster in scaling in a place that's really globally connected as part of this relationship network. And we were really fearful that things might disintegrate or go to sleep for a while.
I don't think
we such an upbeat message. How you're
we are definitely more globally connected in this environment. I think I have some concerns that we might be less locally connected because you're not getting those water cooler conversations that you would do when you're attending events. And I know Leanne and myself would attend countless events, day in, day out, and we're just not meeting our stakeholders. I saw one of our great stakeholders pop up on the chat, and I was thinking I haven't reached out to him for a couple of months, and I'm at events all the time. So I think the local connectedness is suffering more than global connectedness at this point.
So again, for ecosystem leaders, that's a key role. Make sure the community remains as connected, even if it is virtual, even if it is socially distanced. Yeah, indeed. Thank you so much for sharing the great examples from Australasia, from Australia and New Zealand. We are nearly up with our panel here. If I may summarize very briefly, you all, when we look at your actions as policymakers, you all have been investing into startups, keeping these structures intact in the height of the crisis. I hear these really upbeat messages, particularly around angel investment, solving the pre-seed seed funding, and see it as incredibly positive that angels are still willing to engage, although we are facing recession. That's a message I believe really needs to be heard across the world of ecosystems, because it is so incredibly important, and maybe not the spotlight hasn't been on it sufficiently from my perspective. Leanne, thanks so much for sharing ideas around demand generation. Our research, we believe it is important. It's the old Keynes coming back in a sense, in a very dire economic moment, and if we don't stimulate the sector, we may lose a generation, and we all know what the consequences of that would be in a world that's digitalizing more and more and more. And Vic, again, thanks for sharing, particularly the incredible examples, the speed of response that you've demonstrated in New Zealand, which was incredible and really shone the spotlight on what you were doing.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much again for joining us today, for sharing these experiences, and I hope that many of policymakers may reach out to you and share and tap into this wealth of knowledge that you have in Australia and New Zealand.
Stay strong, everyone.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you very much,
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.